Ready for next
Hi.
week.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome to another fine print. Happy to have, of course, here Bruce and Dennis. I'd like everyone to know that Janine intends on participating more frequently, but with the change, she was not able to accommodate this week, so hopefully we'll have her join next time. I did want everyone watching to know that Janine has expressed an interest in participating in more of these conversations, and we look forward to have her, be here with us on a regular or semi-regular basis. So Bruce, how would you like to start off this week?
Well, I think the two primary, I think, developments. One, there was an oral argument in the United States Supreme Court about the constitutionality of President Trump by executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship bestowed by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. I think the questioning indicated that that executive order will not survive review in the United States Supreme Court. I think that it will be telling to see how Mr. Trump responds to the Supreme Court's decision against him, whether he'll call for their impeachment. There are at least 3 members of the High Court who were appointed by Mr. Trump, but that at all will not restrain his willingness to call them terrorists, radical, or whatever if they vote against him. I don't want to overstate the importance of this decision concerning reestablishing the rule of law in the United States. The major, I believe, constitutional violations and even crimes that the president has committed are outside of judicial review. These are the war powers issue, murdering alleged enemies in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, kidnapping foreign leaders in their countries, undertaking wars whenever he feels like it, without any authorization from Congress. These are complete lawlessness initiatives, and the court is not going to step in. It's either Congress, either through the appropriations power, impeachment constrains the president, or we continue to regress towards an utter and complete dictatorship. The second development is kind of maybe in coordination with the first, is President Trump's firing of Pam Bondi, his attorney general. I think Pam Bondi is a lawyer, and she has to worry that if she undertakes certain actions that are totally lawless, she could lose her bar license and be disciplined, the same way that Rudy Giuliani, a former associate deputy attorney general who I worked with at the Department of Justice, lost his law license in New York and probably in District of Columbia. And so there are restraints that she confronted in her efforts to employ law enforcement for partisan political purposes. Trump didn't like them. She was repeatedly losing in the court because she was arguing politics, not law. And I think he now will try to stick someone in. And he's flirted with Lee Zeldin, who's not a lawyer at the Environmental Protection Agency. And not being a lawyer, he's not subject to professional discipline. So he'd be less reluctant to do rather deranged things like trying to have executed and prosecuted members of Congress for stating the truth that under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, an officer is required to disobey a clearly illegal order. And we'll see what happens in the efforts to try to find a replacement for Pam Bondi. I thought it was rather humorous to say that she's finding a sideway movement into the private sector. She didn't have a law landed yet. I noticed the difference with Kristi Noem, who was fired from the head of Department of Homeland Security, ended up with another administration position. She didn't get fired completely. And the same happened with Ed Martin, went from being acting U.S. attorney to a position at Department of Justice. The fact that Pam Bondi is being kicked out in toto, I think that indicates Mr. Trump has a higher scorn for her limited willingness to have some legal constraints on what she does. And I also think it signals a likely departure soon from Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the Department or the Director of National Intelligence, and possibly Kash Patel, who's the FBI director. The amount of incompetence is staggering, and Trump sees, but he's unable to understand the reason they're incompetent is because he's asking them to do things that are well outside the Constitution. But that's not going to restrain Mr. Trump in firing them. It'll try to suggest to the voters in November, well, he's really changing the administration, so gasoline prices will be headed down, and we'll have a booming economy, and the war for the 88th time will end in Iran. All deranged ideas, but he's very skillful at using optics to try to optimize his popular support.
Now, Dennis, you kept coming and going. I don't know, having technical issues.
I'm having some difficulties there, and there's two of me that I'm seeing on my screen.
Well, we're only seeing one of you here, so there's only one of you here. So
I want to build on what Jeffrey just said.
What Bruce?
Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you said what Bruce just said. You want to build on what Bruce said?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dennis.
We have a situation where there's instability in that whole administration. And as a result, there's going to be a lot of thrashing about and people being blamed for one kind of failure or another. With respect to Pam Bondi, Trump feels, by all accounts, that she failed to properly protect him from the Epstein continual uproar. And that is his area of great political vulnerability. Also, there's been an increasing effort to go after political enemies. And whether or not Bondi was reluctant to do that, and Patel doesn't seem reluctant, but the fact of the matter is that Bondi ends up being, as had been pointed out by Bruce, at risk of her law license based on all kinds of factors that go beyond, what's acceptable in a legal practice, even for an attorney general. So I think you're looking at the instability that's happening in the Department of Defense. There's a war going on, and Hegseth is firing a number of top generals, people who have you don't get to be a general, but you go through a series of provenance that brings with it support, institutional support within the particular service branch. And so when he knocks out, top general, that has an effect down the line in terms of the officers' corps, which will mean more instability. Now, Hegseth doesn't really have any serious military experience, and he's forcing people out who do. There's nothing but a train wreck coming up in defense because this war against Iran cannot be won. It is going to be a millstone around Trump's neck politically. It will probably lead to war crimes charges against Hegseth, if not the president. And you're looking at continued administrative pressure there. Now, with respect to the Supreme Court and Trump getting curtailed by district courts as well, I think what we're looking at is that Trump thinks that his effort to throw weight around in the court, particularly with Republican appointees, may not find the kind of support that he was hoping for. And I felt, Bruce, I'd be interested to see what you think about this. I felt that his appearance at the Supreme Court, which of course was unprecedented, but there's no precedent that cannot be broken when it comes to Trump. But when you're talking about the Supreme Court, he shows up and on the birthright citizenship issue. And to me, it was a clear-cut intimidation tactic, and it was totally inappropriate. And I think it backfired. So, you cannot. He may have appointed some of those people, but I would imagine, as human beings, they're going to resent him trying to force his way into their sphere of conduct in such a public and aggressive way.
Yeah, this is the first time in the history of the United States Supreme Court, over 230 years of history, that a president has attended an oral argument. And he left before the argument had concluded, which shows he really wasn't interested in following the legal analysis. He was there, as you point out, Dennis, as a show. I'm here. I'm the president. I have watch on you. And I think it's because he will try to use his probable loss as more political propaganda. See, we have these radical judges, even the ones that, and he doesn't have any reluctance turning on people who are his own appointees and calling them scumbags, radical judges who don't know anything about the law. He's somebody who's never read a law in his life, and he's criticizing others for ignorance. But I agree with you. This is a complete political stunt. I don't think it will work, however.
But it is dangerous because, once again, you have a president who has basically been able to usurp the legislative branch, and then he moves personally and physically into the space of the judicial branch. That if there was ever a moment when it underscored this individual president's desire to impose himself on what was formerly a co-equal branches of government.
Yeah, I agree with that point of view, that it's an image inconsistent with separation of powers.
Thank you.
That's the point you're trying to make, Dennis. I think it's a horrible image, and it's a horrible. And I hope more people see it as that was the message he's trying to send. Is that he's breaking with that's the precedent he's breaking. Is not the acknowledgement of a separation of powers. His presence in that courtroom was making a statement saying, I don't acknowledge really this system of separation of powers. And going back to your point, about Bruce, about the lawyers, I just checked here, at least 22 lawyers involved in election litigation on Trump's behalf have faced some form of sanctions, discipline, or criminal prosecution. 22, at least 22. Okay. I hope they got paid enough for the consequences of doing that. For me, the words of the week are a post of Hegseth, back to the Stone Age. So to me, that is, I think, going back to the dysfunctionality of the administration, I don't know how you can have, a functional administration when the head of that administration, in my opinion, it's not sufficient to impeach Trump. I think you got to impeach him, remove him from the White House, put him in a straitjacket, and send him to insane asylum. Because really, if you take a look at the language he uses, like if a normal person communicated, the way Trump communicates, a typical person would consider that person insane, unbalanced, insane. He's a pathological liar. And then when you have people saying the things like, I'm going to back people, I'm going to bomb people back to the Stone Age. Well, is that a war crime?
Jeffrey, let me just interject, and I apologize. It's an echo, and maybe Dennis remembers. Curtis LeMay, General of the Air Force, his strategy for winning the Vietnam War in 1965. Those exact words. We'll
Right.
bomb them into the Stone Age, right? So he's pulling out the Stone Age strategy that ended in disaster.
Well, over 6 million people dead in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Innocent civilians. And, and of course, to mention over 50,000 U.S. troops who were killed in that war that did not need to happen. And
over $1 trillion.
An excursion. I want to go on. I'm going to go on an excursion to Iran. My excursion. I'm going to pass over, bomb them back to the Stern Age, and come back home. And that's just an excursion. I mean, is that sane language?
No.
Does
Well,
the same person talk like that?
I used to teach a course in college that dealt with language and thought in communication. And it is worth reflecting on the deeper thinking structures of this particular president when he utters words that are and uses language that's so violent. He is a violent person, and he is expressing it in a way that is totally lacking in any compassion for anybody. To talk about bombing somebody back to the Stone Age, you could just say, well, that's colorful language, except for one thing. He has the capacity to order planes, one of which, by the way, was shot down in Iran today, F-16 or 15, with heavy armament to continue bombing. And they blew up a bridge yesterday, and civilians are getting killed. And to so blithely order the bombing of civilians, of civilian infrastructure, of energy, of threatening to bomb energy and water facilities, we have an obligation to ask questions about what this says about his mental state. People can be regaled by the color of his language, but there's military action following his worldview and his recitations, and it's very serious. His going outside the bounds of not just diplomacy, not just international law, but fundamental human decency. It is a fair question to.
Well, I think it goes beyond that. It may go beyond that, Dennis. I think that if you examine, and I think I may be one of the few people who have read the 19,600 pages of Nuremberg trial transcripts. If you examine the attitude and precedent of the United States sitting at Nuremberg after World War II, and one of the crimes charged against the Nazi leadership, including the likes of Hermann Goering and Alfred Jodl and von Ribbentrop, were conducting and participating in crimes of aggression. And a crime of aggression was described as war not in self-defense. So the crimes of aggression against Poland, and then you had Denmark and Norway and Belgium and Netherlands and France and then Soviet Union. We convicted, I think there were 8 Nazi leaders, and we sentenced them, Dennis and Jeffrey, to death for participating in crimes of aggression, i.e. crimes not in self-defense. That fits that definition, fits what we're doing in Iran like a glove. We're not attacked by Iran. Even if they had nuclear ambitions, we've got thousands of warheads. Israel's got hundreds. They weren't threatening to use them offensively against the United States. By any plausible, definition of a crime of aggression, that's what we're undertaking in Iran. And moreover, what was unique about Nuremberg was that the criminality applied not just to the nation, but to the individuals involved, individual liability. That's what's going on in Iran, the crime of aggression. And Justice Jackson then said it's the crime of all crimes because it incorporates the kind of license that leads to all other atrocities, tortures, extrajudicial.
But Bruce, isn't it also true that the law says that you can't even threaten to do that?
Well, that's exactly right. You obviously, that ends up being extortion, right? If you're threatening to do something illegal to extort, some kind of promise or action in return. But we're doing that. This isn't a threat. We're
Right.
bombing them and destroying them every day. This is not hypotheticals. We're in there lethal against civilian targets. Um,
And,
so, and again, this is not even plausibly.
and you have the Secretary of War who says we're not going to be, a paraphrase, we're not going to be troubled by legality. We're interested in lethality.
Yeah, just killed everyone. Now, the other thing that I'd like to point out, because they always raise this issue of nuclear ambitions. The audience needs to know we've got thousands of warheads. We do not let anyone and have never let any independent party examine any of our nuclear facilities. Zero outside inspection. Israel, the same. Israel's not even a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's got in Dimona, they've got nuclear warheads estimated maybe several hundred. They don't permit any inspection at all. We are telling that Iran is a danger because their inspections aren't as fulsome as we'd like them to be. The other thing I believe it's important to note, and again, I think the regime is horrible. It's an abomination like many other regimes in the world. I'm not defending them, but I'm defending the rule of law, which is in the long run, our deliverance from permanent destruction. And that is that Iran is not stupid in fearing the United States wants to invade and regime change. It doesn't forget in 1953, we orchestrated with the British the overthrow of the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, popularly elected prime minister, in favor of a brutal, unelected Shah of Iran. We supported Iraq in its 1980-1988 war against Iran, including chemical weapons and shooting artilleries into urban centers. There isn't any doubt, that we have indicated by our destruction of Libya after Muammar Gaddafi abandoned weapons of mass destruction, that if you don't have WMD, we can come in and take over you anytime we wish. Most recently, looking what happened in Venezuela. We now de facto annexed it, throughout, kidnapped Maduro, saying that maybe Cuba's the next in the queue. So this idea that somehow the mullahs in Iran are crazy because they fear the United States, it's the opposite. They would be crazy not to fear the United States. Again, I want to underscore to the audience, I believe the Iranian regime is a terrible regime. There are a lot of other terrible regimes. We don't know how to cure terrible regimes. The Taliban in Afghanistan was a terrible regime. We spent 20 years and more than $2 trillion trying to make it a better regime. It's even worse. We got to know our limits of change. And when the cure is worse than the disease, you let the disease there, it's still a disease, but you don't try to make it worse, which is what, in fact, we're doing in Iran.
Something about taking care of things here at home first.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. We're the last ones to lecture, as we have a virtual dictatorship at home. Now we're lecturing foreign countries don't have dictators. Why? They're just imitating us. And as Oscar Wilde said, imitation's the greatest form of flattery.
It seems to me, and again, this is pure speculation. One is I assume that he's firing these people because he's getting resistance to his lethality over legality. I assume that there are certain people in the military, even with multiple stars on their shoulders, that probably would reject the lethality over legality argument.
Absolutely.
And probably many who don't want to bomb anyone back to the Stone Age.
Absolutely.
Unless it's for our own safety and security, which this case is obviously not the case. So the other thing is I would speculate is that I thought Trump never really thought I believe Trump never really thought that this would need to be even discussed on the Congress, because I thought the first couple of days of shock and awe from Israel and the United States that they'd kill everyone who was in a leadership position. Somebody would emerge and say, you've been a benevolent dictator, Venezuela. Can you do the same for us? So I assume, I speculate that that's what they assumed would happen. It didn't happen. And that's why they're scrambling the way they are scrambling, because they thought the shock and awe would work, and the regime would collapse, and the people would rebel, and all the leadership would be dead, and we'd be there anointing a new leader who would be, a puppet, for Trump. So I guess they assumed that I guess they never planned beyond that shock and awe strategy of that actually not working, and that's my speculation. And so now what they're doing is really they're not sure what their objectives are. We were supposed to learn those objectives when Trump gave his talk the other night, but we got really more of the same. And going back, why we had a negotiation. First we had a negotiation with Iran during the Obama administration. That produced an agreement. Okay. Then, without a negotiation with them, we exited the agreement. Okay, we didn't have to negotiate, but we did. So we decided, even though you're living up to, and again, I'm not saying anything about the Iran. I'm only looking at our behavior. We're not responsible for other people's behavior. We're only responsible for our own behavior. So we have a party that we negotiate with. They don't trust us. We don't trust them. And the way we're trying to establish trust. So we're trying to establish trust by negotiating an agreement and seeing if that agreement is maintained by both parties. And if it is, maybe you take the next step in generating another agreement where you build upon the trust of both parties complying with the first agreement. Okay. So that's how you build a trusting relationship. Really, how do you build a trusting relationship where you come in and say, you know what? So far, you signed a deal. Okay. We've sent inspectors in. There might be imperfections in the regime, but the bottom line is we each agreed to this. Okay. And you're basically, every time we send inspectors in, they basically come back and say you're in compliance. So we don't really care whether you're in compliance or not. We're breaching the agreement. We're exiting. Okay. So all the things that you thought you could expect from us, that we told you could expect from us, you should never have expected from us. So, what we're going to do is we're going to rip up that agreement. You got to do what we say, or we're going to bomb you back to the Stone Age. Okay.
Exactly.
How do you build trust in a negotiation?
Well,
then you go back. Let me finish quickly, Dennis, to get to you. Then you go back and say, "Hi, let's negotiate again." And while you're negotiating, the other party then learns all those negotiations were in bad faith. They were to have you surprised because you were about to do a shock and awe strategy, and you were having a conversation, so you would not be prepared for the shock and awe strategy. And now you sit back and say, "Oh, this time I'm not. This time I'm serious." What do people expect the Iranian people and leadership? What do you think they should believe at this point in time?
Jeffrey, you omitted he also demanded unconditional surrender. What does that indicate to the other side? Unconditional surrender, right?
So let's slow this part of the conversation down, because it really is it really foretells where this is heading and what is going to happen in the near future with respect to Iran. Not only did we tear up the acronymic JCPOA agreement that guaranteed inspections, and to which Iran committed itself to an unprecedented level of oversight of its peaceful nuclear. But so we tore that up, and as Jeffrey pointed out, if I may paraphrase, that was all pretext. It didn't matter that there was an agreement. There was to dispute the agreement was pretextual because there was another plan on dealing with Iran. So what happened after that more recently? 2 separate negotiations, and during the negotiation, the United States commenced attacks. And more recently, on February 28th, while negotiations were going on, they initiated this bombing attack, killing the Ayatollah, launching a Tomahawk missile strike at the Manab girls' school. and then a couple days later, assassinating the person, Ali Larijani, who was, actually the negotiator on behalf of Iran. So, and then Trump complains that he doesn't have anybody to negotiate with. So what we're looking at here is the U.S. is not interested in negotiating. It is interested, as the president said, in the surrender of Iran, or alternatively, so heavily that any semblance of a civilized society disappears. Now,
unconditional surrender or Stone Age. Those are the choices seem to be.
right. So I mean, the colorful language belies the fact that he's already commenced in doing that. Now, there was an F-16 shot down today inside Iran. Iran has some ability to defend itself and to fight back, but more than anything, more than its defensive capabilities or its offensive capabilities that's being demonstrated throughout the Gulf region, is the fact that Iran has the ability to choke off transit through the Strait of Hormuz, and to also get the Houthis to participate in making transit through the other point,
Red Sea, Suez Canal.
Suez Canal, and what you have then, and what we're in right now, is a global crisis. This isn't just, Iran actually, by virtue of Trump's policies, Iran has been placed into the driver's seat in terms of control over the passage of oil, and the consequences of this are going to be long term. And it almost doesn't matter how much bombing happens, Iran is still going to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and possibly, thank you, Bruce, through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, the Red Sea. I'm sorry. So I think we have to take into consideration that the economic consequences of this are going to have a knock-on effect, politically affecting America's allies and affecting things at home.
Well, I think all that's true. And I would just add, we basically have given the middle finger to every country in the world, saying your problem. Yeah, we do what we want. The NATO allies said, your problem, not ours. We may concern, like Napoleon, that we end up with zero allies, even ad hoc allies, by acting so arrogantly I think that also means Israel. Don't worry, we're going to part company with Israel, because Trump's particular fascination with just doing whatever he wants isn't in accord with Netanyahu. I don't know what Israel's game plan is either, other than permanent war so Netanyahu can avoid jail time. But I'd also believe that we may be imputing too much reason to Trump. I believe we're speaking with a person who acts with all the maturity of a 1-year-old, just what he feels like at that moment. And then he can do the opposite in the next moment. Well, you got to open the straits in 1 day, then you have 6 days, then you have 8 days, then he doesn't care. Then the straits are going to open on their own by spontaneous combustion. I mean, you can't even put method in the madness.
So that's why I said he needs to be in a straitjacket.
No, I agree with you.
In a straitjacket.
Yeah, so we're imputing, a line of reasoning that doesn't go through his head. There isn't any reason.
And the way I look at damages, okay,
yeah,
every damage that the world is suffering now because the Strait of Hormuz is closed, that's damage that was caused by the United States. It's the United States action that produced that reaction, and anybody who has been caused harm by that action, Iran is not the responsible party for that. The United States is the responsible party for it. So I think if people went to court and these were done by individuals or companies or something like that, I think they thought that the incidence of who caused the harm was the United States. So and is trying to protect itself, from because this would have never happened in the absence of us not attacking Iran. Okay, the Strait of Hormuz would most likely be open today. So it's closed because of what we did, and all the countries that are suffering that damage, we've made that problem for them. We're responsible for solving that problem for them. We're responsible for the economic cost associated with the problem.
Yeah, and I want to go back.
And it's an absurdity. As you know, I did a video on this that not too many people watched, but I did a video on this in the sense of one is linking NATO to our action in Iran is a false frame. It's a fiction. Okay, NATO has nothing to do with the United States attacking other countries. Okay. The NATO treaty that's not part of any NATO agreement. If the United States wants to call up some country, hey, you and I are friends, I'm doing, we didn't seek their authorization. We didn't seek their approval. We can't drag them along to our thing and then say that what this has to do is that we're not going to break up NATO because NATO was not there when we need NATO. No, the document doesn't. The document of NATO have no obligation. That this has nothing to do with the NATO treaty, and it's all a false argument. It's a false argument because Trump wants to blame other people, and he wants us to hate other countries because that's his methodology. His methodology is if you don't do what's convenient for you, I'm going to start slandering you and libeling you and saying all these horrible things about you. Because this is the way I want to get you to my mob together to coerce you to behave according to the way I want you to behave. It's why he was why he went to the Supreme Court hearing and thinking that his powerful stare, would influence people and say, you think there's distance between us? There is no distance between us. You think there's separation from us? There is no separation from us. So this is his MO. This is who he is. Nobody should be surprised by that. He belongs in a straitjacket. Nobody should accept his bullshit from the Harry Frankfurt perspective use of it. Is somebody saying words where they don't feel bound by truth and they don't care whether something's truthful or the concept of truth and lie is an irrelevant concept to them. And that's more dangerous than a liar, is a bullshitter from the Frankfurt sense, is that Trump is a bullshit. And he's using his bullshit, his propaganda, for other countries to pay a price for how they have a sense of obligation they don't really have, and it's all a fiction.
Well, he's in a straitjacket, and it's the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. If I would just for our audience here, NATO obligations are triggered when a member is attacked by a foreign country. Iran does not attack the United States. So whatever else NATO obligates, it's not triggered by Article 5 or anything else.
I want to go back to something. Anyone who's watching has had the experience of going into a shop with delicate figures, let's say, and little signs that say, if you break it, you buy it. Yeah. Well, whatever we have broken in Iran, whatever the United States has broken in Iran, we bought. One of the preconditions or the conditions that Iran has to settle this is reparations. Now, the United States has inflicted already hundreds of billions of dollars of damage on Iran, hundreds of billions. We're going to have to pay for that. I want the American people haven't really been doing that.
And Israel too.
And Israel too. Thank you. So the United States, people of the United States haven't really understood that we're going to get a bill for this. We broke it. We bought it. In addition to that, the U.S. presence in the region is going to be ended. It's already de facto. It's ending because of the missile strikes on the bases all in the area, and the missile strikes that are now being conducted not only by Iran, but by Iraq, and I think by Yemen as well. So the U.S. presence, let's go pre-February 28th. The U.S. There was no, as Bruce had pointed out, people had passage through the Strait of Hormuz. This wasn't the issue it is today. The U.S. bases were in the area. Now, as a result of the decision for what's called a preemptive attack on Iran, we no longer have access to the Strait of Hormuz, and our bases are being removed. Now, for me personally, I don't think the U.S. should have bases anywhere in the world other than in the U.S. But that's my opinion. And yet, what Trump has done is to dramatically alter U.S. policy, break alliances, execute a strategy that puts him in danger of being charged in a Nuremberg-type proceeding, killed countless innocents, being responsible for the death of American men and women who serve this country. Back to what Jeffrey said about who we're dealing with here, none of this reflects any process of reason, common sense, even loyalty to America. There is something that is so screwed up about this that you can try to post hoc decipher some kind of reason or rhyme about it, but it is like a lot of destructive things that happen in the world, it ends up being senseless.
Yeah, I think that the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence that Trump will be celebrating this year, attempting to, shows his lunacy, because if you read the Declaration, Trump is doing everything the Declaration denounces. And then he'll say that, he's the greatest celebrant and exponent of the Declaration in the history of the world, where he's doing the opposite of it. And that shows, I think, his mental derangement. And he's willing to live in fantasy land. And unfortunately, as you both pointing out, the harms are huge.
John Quincy Adams said, "Don't look for monsters abroad."
Yeah.
Yes, we should not look for monsters abroad. The biggest monster was residing in the White House now.
Yeah.
That is the biggest monster. Monster number two is the country that we are aiding and abetting. Is Bibi Netanyahu. Okay, there are a lot of bad actors out there. I don't want to condone what Putin and battle with Ukraine and this invasion of Ukraine and things that the Chinese government does and what other governments done. There are also horrible things, as we all talked about. A lot of bad countries, a lot of bad leaders. The world is not really the place any of us would like it to be. Where individual sovereignty ruled and countries basically tried to leave the people alone and understood that's what government should do. But there are no, in my opinion, too big of monsters on the planet than Trump and Bibi. When we had the Nuremberg reference is such an important reference. Okay, it's when the world conceded that these type of wars should not occur. Okay, it was not meant to just be about Germans and unique to Germans and unique to the Holocaust. Genocide is unacceptable. Wars of aggression, okay, are unacceptable. Okay, on a global standard, we were creating international law that says we as civilized people, we don't want a repeat of this. So what happens? We go out and we fund a repeat of it by funding the genocide in Gaza, and now we want to extend that genocide because bombing people back to the Stone Age is an act of genocide. Okay, so now we want to commit genocide in another country where we basically said, here are the options: unconditional surrender to us. You have to acknowledge that you are not a sovereign country. Okay, that you're a subject of Donald J. Trump. Okay, and if you don't accept you're a subject of Donald J. Trump, you're going to be bombed back to the Stone Age. Okay, that's Nuremberg worthy, So among the list of people that were judged in Nuremberg and were deemed to having the right judgment be them having a hanging.
Yeah.
You know, I would say if we look at that Nuremberg criteria, okay, that would be that, you know, that could be the consequence for both Trump and Bibi if the criteria of Nuremberg was applied equally to them.
Yeah, for sure.
I say though that when you look at U.S. foreign policy, in a way, what Trump has done is to put the violent capstone on a decades-long policy of intervention and overturning of governments. Often using military force, and this really brings us to a moment of reflection of America's role in the world. We can dissect the knock-on effects of what he's doing in terms of trade, the dollar, allies, the economic effect on the American people, which is going to continue to grow, an adverse effect. But we need to look at and ask this question now: what is the proper role for America in the world? And I don't think it's to be a nation above nations. I think it's to be a nation among nations. And it must not be this military juggernaut that demands control over resources or death to the leaders of other countries. We need to change our role in the world. We need to roll back these bases. They're getting ready to spend $1.5 trillion in the next budget, fiscal year 2027, for more war. This has to change. We cannot sustain even a pretense of a decent standard of living for the American people, while 80% of discretionary spending is being gobbled up by these military contractors.
And Dennis, you're leaving out the 200 billion more that Trump wants for Iran. 200 billion,
exactly.
and climbing, aside from the 1.5, annual expenditure.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in federalism, and as much should be devolved to the states as possible. So on the one hand, what Trump said the other day is, there are many of these issues, like with childcare and stuff. There are 50 states out there. We can't handle every problem. I agree with that statement. What I disagree with is, a corollary of that statement is, if I'm spending so much money that I need to tax the people so much money, and that there's a supremacy of the executive branch of the federal government, okay, how much money am I leaving for the people to do the things that the people need to do to support their day-to-day lives? If on a federal level, I'm taxing them into bankruptcy, what am I leaving for them? What am I leaving for where money am I leaving for the states over? I'm leaving nothing for the states over. So for him to sit back and say, I'm going to spend $1.5 trillion on defense, and to think that people have an unlimited pocket, that money's not coming from somewhere else. Yeah, the people that now might use that $500 billion to support, child care and education. That's now Trump saying, I have a senior claim. The first claim is to me. You get to spend only what's left over, but the first claim is to me. So he's not leaving the states any money to get from their people to do the things to help people on a local basis, because he's the senior claimant on it, and he's using it to kill people around the world.
Yeah. And going back to what Dennis said about the role of the United States in the world. I mean, I think that the universal wisdom captured in George Washington's farewell address, and what Jeffrey referred to, the 1821 July 4th address of John Quincy Adams to Congress. It's not to try to make the world perfect, because mankind's made of crooked timber. It says we want peace. We want invincible self-defense. We want trade. That doesn't mean we like you, but we know that trade can be beneficial. It can at least bring parties together for a period of time. But that's it. And the influence abroad. Our role in the world abroad is by example, to influence other countries and peoples to embrace self-government, freedom of speech, the celebration of liberty. And example does work. When the United States adopted the Constitution, all of the tyrants in the world trembled not because we had, one tugboat, off the coast of Boston. We didn't have any military. We had an idea of individual freedom, unalienable rights that terrified all these despots. And we had the French Revolution soon thereafter, and the ideas then spread. Not as far as I would have liked them, but they did have resonance there. And now, does that mean that we're going to make the world perfect? No, it doesn't. There are going to be other horrible countries around, and all we can do is urge them to follow our example. But all we can do is make it worse by going in and intervening and thinking that we can turn Afghans into Canadians or whatever. It has to come from home. Self-government has got to be a cultural trait, civic organizations that we can encourage, but we can't mandate. And that's what our role ought to be abroad. On that score, I would hugely increase legal immigration. We should take anybody who wants to come to the United States, work hard, follow our laws, be ambitious and entrepreneurial, celebrate, wisdom and benevolence over violence and ignorance. They're American, because America is an idea. It's not a place where you were born. And that's what our foreign policy ought to be. And we'll get the brain drain of all these other countries. We'd take off like a comet if we did that. But the most important thing is get away from this idea that the role of the United States is to make the world perfect, or Woodrow Wilson, make the world safe for democracy. No, we need to provide a model that encourages others to emulate us and have invincible self-defense. But we don't go abroad, as Jeffrey said, in search of monsters to destroy, not because there are no monsters there. There are. But in trying to slay the monster, all history shows we then become the monster ourselves, right? Which is, in fact, what we see going on today in Iran.
Yeah, Dennis, I have some questions for Bruce, but Dennis, you have a hard stop, so let me turn the floor to you.
In these discussions, I think it's really important that we start to talk about the America that should be, that could be. Because what we see right now is totally unacceptable, except to those who are profiting from the violence. We need to keep focusing on the potential of America to actually work for Americans and for people to have a decent quality of life, to be able to find their practical aspirations rewarded through work and through education and having a chance for decent health care. These are fundamental things that are not being addressed in our headlong rush towards another war that could go on for quite a while. And I think that we must change America's role in the world. We cannot, having a standing army has been used and licensed for aggression. And it's been well established in this discussion and well established in international law that aggression is a crime. We've lost the primal human sympathetic core, which informed a nation that America could be a country that is about goodness, about justice, about things that matter to people and in their daily lives, instead of just about violence and subjugation and transfer of the wealth upwards. So I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I think it'd be good to invite those who are watching this to go to the site and to share some of their ideas about what America can be and should be, and also what we should not be, which I think we've outlined pretty much. I want to say in closing to all of those who celebrate this season in various ways, let's keep our eye on the beauty that exists in the world as well. and treasure it so that we do not let um, people who are obsessed with destruction uh, destroy the glory of the flower, for example. There is something that if we do not preserve what's beautiful in this world, this is a real danger. That's why the danger of destruction of Iran, which is such a beautiful country and has so many incredible, have so much incredible art from Persia. We really, just as what was destroyed in Iraq, in terms of cultural artifacts. We really have to preserve beauty. We have to preserve art. We have to preserve those things that inform higher human sentiments that reach the spiritual. So, with that, good Pesach to all of our Jewish friends, and Happy Easter to Christians. And let us hope that as we move through these discussions, we can find that bit of light that suggests that we might be able to uh, um, not only seek, but find a better world. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, Bruce, I have some, and those were always wonderful words from Dennis, and I think that's a good topic for next week.
Yeah.
But for now, I want to ask you, when you were in part of the Reagan administration, when Reagan pulled out of Lebanon after trying to help preserve peace, and then the American barracks got attacked, and I think over 100 soldiers
Killed.
were killed, like 120 or something. I don't remember exact number, but it was about that. And Reagan said, I'm getting out of there. Did people view that Reagan in the White House and his people administration? This is an act of weakness or an act of wisdom?
Yeah. It's an act of wisdom. You might call it a parallel, Jeffrey, with Dunkirk. Winston Churchill knew that Dunkirk wasn't necessarily a triumph, but as an act of wisdom, he knew, he had to retreat at that time. And it was obvious that we were not doing anything constructive in Lebanon. There was the hubris, I think, at that time that we could transform Lebanon into a Christian rule of law state that would be an ally of Israel. It turned out to be a complete fantasy of Mossad, Israel, and the United States as well. Again, I do not want at all to criticize motives that are benign. But benign motives still does not excuse stupidity. And you got to recognize there's certain limitations on what you can accomplish.
Right.
And the idea that, even today, we can go into Lebanon, it's been divided forever. They got the Druze, they have the Christians, they have the Shias, they have the Sunnis, and they've been divided artificial country ever since the Ottoman Empire dissolved over a century ago. Now, I certainly sympathize with the misery that this kind of division inflicts, but we don't know how to cure it. There's certain things that are beyond our ability, to diminish, and we just have to accept that and try to encourage improvement by our own example. And that's this idea that, and the military, United Judge's got to be able to stand up, and generals got to say, Mr. President, we can't do that. I'm not obeying a clearly illegal order. We cannot transform the world. We're not going to make Iran into a fledgling democracy. We extinguished the only one that existed for a period of time. It's not going to happen. So you shouldn't use us as a propaganda tool. We can't do that. But they're trained to just say, yeah, we can do anything. We can make the waves go back. No, sometimes it's better to acknowledge that there's certain things you can't do and be able to live with a world that's imperfect, but it's less imperfect than trying to make it perfect and then, as a consequence, compounding the evil.
And based upon Reagan's behavior, Reagan did not sit in the White House saying, gee, this is a wise act for me to get the hell out. I made a mistake going in. My intentions were good, but I learned my lesson. This happened, and I had to make a decision: either escalate and put Lebanon back to the Stone Age, or I learned the fact is that there's limitations to my ability to have control over circumstances, and I recognize I can't control every circumstance in the world, and there's limited to what I control. So I'm just getting out, and yes, this is a mess. I wish I had a magic wand that I could help. I tried to help, and I only made things worse for them and for me.
Yeah.
So now I don't think Reagan was saying, because this is what he did, saying, gee, you know what, Gorbachev is going to think I'm really weak, so I'm never going to get a decent deal with Russia because look, they just think I cut and run. The world will lose respect for America. I think that era of Reagan Thatcher era was an era of one of the best post World War II eras of respect for the United States. Post World War II, and people did not perceive Reagan as weak, not sitting back and having Cap Weinberger get up and say, I'm gonna put Lebanon back to the Stone Age, for doing this. So they had conversations, they had deliberations, and they acted from some sense of wisdom. Not that I'm not trying to advocate that Reagan, was perfect, but I did another video that I have not circulated much, and I have not put it up on any social media, but I tried to draw an analogy from how Reagan dealt with Gorbachev to how Trump is dealing with Iran. I think it's fair to say that Russia, at that point in time, Soviet Russia, represented a greater threat to the United States than Iran does. Okay,
Yes.
so I think it's fair to say they had that Reagan and Gorbachev, their first meetings were not very successful meetings, but even though that the conversation of even the unsuccessful meeting led to successful meetings, because they each began to trust, while they had differences, the sincerity of each party to try and get to a deal. But they had to understand each other. Reagan had to understand Gorbachev. Gorbachev had to try to understand Reagan, and they had to figure out. And during this process of getting to understand each other, it wasn't a position of, Reagan clearly didn't go to Gorbachev and say, I can return you to the Stone Age. So I don't need to understand you. You just got to understand me. Okay. So what we got is we started having peace with Russia. We started a process where we were actually agreeing to reduce our nuclear stockpiles. And Reagan's objective was to denuclearize the world. I mean, Reagan, when people talk, the initial goal Reagan had talked about with the Star Wars initiative was to develop this defensive shield that would make offensive weapons moot and offer it to the world, so that if the whole world was covered by this defensive shield, there'd be no reason to have offensive weapons if everyone could protect themselves against offensive weapons. So the idea was not a shield that was a monopoly for the U.S., so it could keep its offensive weapons and use it against everyone, and nobody would be able to have weapons to use against the U.S. Reagan's vision was a global shield against nuclear weapons, so there'd never be an incentive for anyone to create a nuclear weapon, because a nuclear weapon would never be effective. That's what he described as his vision. So I think a lot of people really don't talk about what his vision was not necessarily saying, I want a monopoly so that I could use nuclear weapons against whoever I want, but I'm going to render their nuclear weapons against us. He wanted to do sort of a version of what somebody like Szilard wanted to do after World War II, which was share nuclear technology equally amongst everyone and make it a common good, not a private asset of the United States, because then it would lead to the type of escalation that we saw, and you want to prevent that rather than encourage that, as opposed to Trump, who just says unconditional surrender or Stone Age. What does it say about the American people? How could the same people that admired Reagan, how could they have any admiration for Trump?
Yeah, I'm just the American people. How anybody could admire Mr. Trump, and he's one of the few individuals. It's hard to find any trait at all that's worthy of applause. But I think that Jeffrey, what shows is that oftentimes, if we are restrained, things good happen to us. And I call what the so-called congressional appropriations measure that ended the Vietnam War by cutting off all funding after August 15th, 1973. Now let's think of the fallout. Now it's often said, well, presidents are so smart; they have all these geniuses in the executive branch. Congress doesn't know anything, and so therefore we need to trust the president. So here we have Congress taking the lead, right? This war is ended. There's no money to conduct any combat over operations over Indochina. At that time, North Vietnam was an enemy. We got out of Vietnam, and Vietnam now is an ally or semi-ally against China. So, who had the better insight? Congress, ending the war by cutting off the funds, or presidents? Who could still be perhaps fighting in Vietnam today, and kind of forcing Vietnam into the arms of China and then the Soviet Union before it dissolved. So this idea that presidents have this great wisdom and omniscience because they gather intelligence over the world is really nonsense, and it's not established by any experience whatsoever. The fact is, the kind of wisdom you need to conduct, I believe, enlightened foreign policy is having a mastery of human nature. I would trust William Shakespeare being able to write Julius Caesar, the War of the Roses with Henry V, Henry IV. William Shakespeare would know more about what causes human conflict and war than any president. And he didn't need any classified information, but he understood human nature, and it's captured in the portraits that he draws of all these characters, Cassius and Brutus and Julius Caesar and Iago and Othello or whatever. That and I can guarantee you, in order to master human nature and be a great philosopher, you don't need to occupy the White House, but you have to have humility. You have to have a desire to make the world a better place, not out of some selfish ulterior motive, but because that's what we're obligated to do as human beings. And we need to get away from this mesmerization of, oh, well, he's in the White House and he's standing up and he's standing on some battleship, and that means that he's all wise. No way. Even just because you know how to kill doesn't mean you're very wise. Napoleon knew how to kill very well. He was not wise, and he destroyed himself first in Moscow and then coming back and at Waterloo. And so we need to inculcate into our culture a far greater deference to philosophical wisdom and humility than happens today, because those traits don't get you on TikTok. They don't get you invited on star shows, like entertainment, not wisdom. But I can tell you, without wisdom, we're going towards omnicide. That's a word that means a species destroying itself. Keep that in mind. We're headed toward omnicide.
Yeah, I think that was also well expressed in a different form by Frederick Hayek in his Nobel lecture, The Pretense of Knowledge.
Yeah.
And the fact is that's what markets do. Markets solve the knowledge problem. Yeah. Is that no individual can ever have all the information and process everything any better than the whole distributed network of market transactions amongst individuals. And that process is what produces knowledge, and that knowledge is reflected in market prices. So, if not, we'd get government pricing things and government allocating capital, and that's called socialism. Socialism is the belief, or communism is the belief, or socialism, that you have an expert that can make these decisions, and they could replace their judgment with market judgments. So I don't understand why people who trust markets for economic decisions, would not trust markets for political decisions. It's all about decision making and allocation of scarce resources.
I think that there's one element here. I think if we can just pause a second, there's another element I think that goes beyond that. And that is, even with regard to the marketplace, we say there's certain things like child labor or slavery. We don't care if the free market would enable you to sell yourself into slavery. Certain elements about being a human being, we don't even let you. They would call them their unalienable rights. You can't even sell yourself into slavery. And I think when we move from markets and the optimal allocation of economic resources into the realm of how we try to protect liberty and individual freedom, it isn't just a market feedback. That is, what we're trying to do with philosophy and philosophers is to inspire people outside of a market function to respond to something more than just cash, a quantitative figure of how valuable something is. It is something that's non-quantitative. And that's where I think that's the realm of self-governance, where we're urging and we're hoping to get responses that go beyond, well, what's in it for me, to try to inspire the kind of fraternity, combined wisdom, and ambitions that make the world better for everybody. And that's in a different way. You try to make everybody a winner and there are no losers in the political realm, just like you want that in the economic realm by having the person who gives something get in return something they view as equal in value. But even as I say, Jeffrey, even in that context, there's certain things we say, no, you can't sell yourself into slavery. We're not going to sell yourself. We outlaw prostitution. It's child labor. You can't be Oliver Twist, even if you wanted to be Oliver Twist, and maybe go into a workhouse or that time in Great Britain that Dickens was writing about in the coal mines. But of course, it takes wisdom, I believe, to know where to draw the line. And that's where I think we run a problem, Jeffrey. It's one thing to draw the line at slavery and child labor 18 hours a day, but you got to draw the line someplace. And I don't think it makes any sense to say, no, because that the exception gobbles the rule. And then you have virtually all of the resources, communism, socialism, decided by in the government rather than the free markets that ordinarily can be trusted to optimize the allocation of resources. So it just means life is complicated. That's why we have to encourage wisdom, learning, reflection in our own development in society in general through education.
Yes, I think that one is most, as many people will find, utility functions. Utility functions is both, financial income, material income, and psychic income. So people don't just define themselves by money. Money is an important part of the utility function, but it's not the only parts of utilities function. So to the extent that people's utility maximizes, it doesn't mean they're just maximizing money. It means they're maximizing their definition of what utility means. And different people might have a difference between how much psychic income they need as opposed to financial income they need. And every individual has their own utility function, how they balance off, their psychic demands and wants and desires from their material demands, wants and desires. And people come up with different answers to that question of how much time do they want to allocate towards enjoying life and how much time they want to allocate towards producing value that other people will value. So how many times do they want to consume pleasure as opposed to engage in productive work? And everybody will determine what the optimal allocation is for them, and that's a personal decision. So it's not necessarily that when you look at things economically, that means maximizing money. It means maximizing utility with the understanding that every individual has their own utility function. And the only way to understand the utility function is by observing their behavior. So how many hours they're willing to work. Some people want to work 8-hour days. Many executives that get to the point, they work 100-hour work week, so because their goals are different than someone who wants to get a paycheck. Their tolerance for risk and the lifestyle they want to live, they accept a trade-off that many other people don't accept. So I think that's the philosophy that everybody has in their life is what's important to them. And not everybody wants to be a billionaire. Maybe everybody wants to be a billionaire. They just don't want to. They don't want to make the trade-off to make that happen. And then they say, if this is what it takes to be a billionaire, I'm happy with what I have now. So I like to think in terms of, that these are things. And then it's always the law of unintended consequences. Is that typically when government gets in and sees a problem, usually the solution it comes up with creates consequences and externalities that frequently and almost always are the case, that they tend to be worse than the problem they hope to solve. So going back to your previous statement regarding foreign policy, is the government should be the same with domestic policy. They should have the humility to understand things that might not be ideal, but the question is, can they make them better or not?
Yeah.
So in most cases, they say, the expression, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So I think that's a statement that has, a lot of wisdom to it, is that a lot of well-intentioned people, end up doing. Look, Hitler thought he was a well-intentioned person, right? He believed in a theory of a master race. He believed in like the eugenics movements, and that there are people who were biologically and superior biological specimens, and he thought he was making society better by removing inferior species, in a genetic pool of individuals that made the world a worse place. So Hitler, in his way, saw himself as a humanitarian, and you could say at that point in time, embracing some of the ideas of Darwin and eugenics, it could be presented as, this is a humanitarian act. It's kind of like not too indifferent, not too different than than watching the Dan Brown novel. Well, I'm more familiar with the book than the novel. The movie than the book, but I saw the movie Inferno, and what's that about? It's about some guy who claims to says the planet, there are too many of us on the planet. Okay, so we really love the planet. I'm going to go out, I'm going to create something that's going to wipe out about a third of society, and then we won't be overpopulated, and then we'll make a better place. And it's going to be kind of like randomly distributed who dies, but whoever dies, they know they died for a good cause. They died for a cause of making the planet better for everyone else. So and these people see themselves, as humanitarians. So this is the problem: is do you give the government the monopoly over their being the humanitarian and them making their judgments and them determining what the trade-offs are from their judgments, or do you leave people to figure it out on their own? So I prefer to always let people figure it out on their own. I'll never trust, the wisdom of people who have coercive power.
Yeah,
So,
call it monopoly of violence. Yeah, so
Yes.
they get away. But the other thing that I think is important to reflect on, Jeffrey, is that what kind of people get attracted to politics? They're sociopaths, and you just go in. I deal with them every day. These are not normal people with normal appetites. They need to be the center of attention. They need to exercise power. I'm better than you. We see that Trump's kind of an extreme case, but he's hardly the only one. And that means you have to be especially on your guard and be wary about entrusting power to the government, beyond just making sure that no one can engage in predation against someone else. You have courts of law, but otherwise invincible self-defense. But that's the end of the activities, because you can't trust these people. It's not like they're your next door neighbor. No, next door neighbors don't run for public office. It's the nature of politics to attract deformed individuals, and we see that every day. But I think also, in some sense, Jeffrey, if you try to even think of the nature of government at all, if you read the Declaration of Independence, I believe it established individual sovereignty. When it says you have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, unalienable means it's unalienable even by popular sovereignty. Unalienable means nothing can take it away from you, right? Nothing. So, and that lends, I think, credence, to your idea of anarchy. But I think anarchy ends up being, then nobody protects you when people are employing violence against you to destroy your unalienable rights. But that, in my judgment, is the high water mark of thinking about the human species. We have these unalienable rights, that individual sovereignty. We get to chart our own destiny. We march to our own drummer as long as we're not interfering with others. We have to struggle to acquire wisdom. We struggle to find what benevolence is, to find fulfillment. But that struggle itself is success, that we're not a pawn of someone else. We have individual decision-making, moral accountability. And that's, I believe, that needs to be inculcated in the culture. I've always wanted to, and I have time, write fairy tales that change, kings and queens and everybody else. And you got to teach children at the youngest age. Always ask questions. You are not a slave to your parents. Just because you have parents doesn't mean you're a slave. Ask questions, not out of being rebellious, but because you want to know. There has to be a reason behind things. And that should be inculcated at the earliest ages by, if the parents don't do it directly, through fairy tales. Fairy tales are very bad because most of the time they have kings and queens and things happen. They're the good guys and the bad guys. Nobody ever asks any questions about why you're exercising this power. Why do you have authority? Mr. King, why are you in that castle? Miss Queen, why you have this golden XYZ? How did you acquire that? Which are questions that kids ought to be asking at age 2 and 3 and 4. I mean, John Stuart Mill was reading and writing Greek at age 3. So it can be done as long as it's in a disciplined way. But I believe that's ultimately our salvation as a species. It's either that or omnicide. And let's get away from omnicide and towards the salvation that comes from individual sovereignty as being our summum bonum.
I think your prescription, your remedy for ending the wars is Congress to stop funding them.
Yeah.
I think there's a bigger problem today relative to back in the time of the Vietnam War. And what's the difference? That the amount of people with skin in the game today versus skin in the game there is materially different. We basically have a tax code where a smaller and smaller percentage of people pay an income tax. So back then we had more people in society skin in the game, and we ran smaller deficits. So basically, the incidence of government spending fell on more people and fell less on future generations. So now what we have is we have almost half a society where the incidence of government spending doesn't fall on them, and the other half it does. But a lot of it has been transferred to future generations without a voice. So I think the politics are very different today because there's a lot less skin in the game today than there was back then. We have a bigger government that does more, and they do it more with the people contributing, with less people contributing. So I think the dynamics and the incentives have changed, and the people driving the policy understand that that's a consequence. For them to have the greatest freedom to have, they have to know whatever they do has little consequence on people's lives today. So how do they accomplish that? Is to have deductibles to the point in time where a whole bunch of people get things, but they don't pay into the system. And then you have the people who do pay in, not too heavily burdened by transferring a lot of the burden of that to people that have never been born, who were just born. So
well, that's true, Jeffrey. That's everything you say is true, but there's another angle that cuts in the other direction, at least with regard to Iran. The Vietnam War wasn't causing the price of gasoline to jump by $1 or $2 or $3 a barrel, right? That is, if you look at the actual impact already of the war against Iran, it's already having adverse effect on lots of Americans. And the people are opposed to that. If farmers can't get fertilizer anymore, they need fertilizer coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. So that works in favor of Congress cutting off the funding. And what we're having here is Congress just ending the war. We're not spending, we haven't spent the other $200 billion right now. But I believe that we just need to change the idea of who we are as a people. I think it's more of a cultural than an economic issue, to be candid. Why do we want to dominate the whole world other than by example? We should have humility. We're not necessarily God's chosen people. Do we deserve that? Are we at home, displaying the kind of virtues, that we think everybody else should emulate because we're superior? We spend our time on TikTok, and I call them juvenile amusements. Our culture is down the drain. Education plunges each year. That's what we need and ought to be fixing, and worried more about that than, I say, bestriding the world like a colossus and getting some gratification because we can destroy any country we want by dropping bombs. We can't build it and make it better. but we know how to destroy things. And that, in my judgment, requires going back to education. We've got to rewrite the textbooks. We've got to rewrite, what's said in the classroom, rewrite what's said around the dinner table, redo what's said in the churches and the mosques and the synagogues and the preachers. So the idea of being an enlightened society changes, and it's got to be a moral, an intellectual concept, rather than what's your per capita income. Okay, that's one thing I don't mind measuring that, but the greatest standard of any society is it just? Is justice the end or not? If you fail that test, it doesn't matter how much money you got, you're still not a civilized society.
I agree on that, but that's antithetical to our current political environment. There is no conversation in DC that's based upon that framework.
Yeah, true enough. But I in my feudal tiny way, I try to inject it there. You can't see any results, but you got to try. Is all I got to say. The only sin is to fail to try.
That's why we try where we try in the marketplace for ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
So any final words for this week, Bruce?
No, well, I hope that everybody, who wants to celebrate, Easter, and everyone who wants to celebrate Good Friday, that's our toleration. Whether others do it, I think that's a time that gets away from preoccupation with money and things of that sort. And we have Passover, and hey, people, we should celebrate the opportunity people have, to find their own spiritual fulfillment, to always ask questions, and because you believe something doesn't mean someone's an enemy, because they may subscribe to something else. Let's be broad-minded and accept everybody as made of the same DNA, and treat each other accordingly with equal respect.
Well, I'd like to, if since you and Dennis have talked about a seasonal message, okay, my seasonal message is this, okay, for all those that are, I will address the Jewish community as being a Jew. I don't think I have a right to address a community I'm not part of. I am part of a human community, but I like when people sit around and they had their seders. Well, they've already had their two seders, but I'd like to reflect upon what the meaning of Passover is, and it's about liberation and freedom, and the only way you get to really enjoy life is if you are free and liberated, and apply that as a universal principle that anyone at a seder should want, that everyone who lives in the West Bank, everyone who lives in Gaza, everyone in Iran, to feel that they are entitled to the same rights as the people who are celebrating the Passover, and that the Passover should not be a Seder, should not be a uniquely Jewish event. It's something that every society, every group of people should be able to sit around a table and say how wonderful it is living in a state of liberty, and living in a state where not only where I have my freedom and liberty, but I can rely upon the fact that other people respect my dignity as an individual, and they understand my right to be left alone, and that nobody is really free and living under a state of liberty if people are not leaving them alone. So I appeal to every Jew around the world: let's leave the Iranian people alone. Let's leave the Gazans and the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Palestinians in Gaza. Let's leave them alone. Leave the people in Lebanon alone, okay? They're not a threat if you treat them with the same respect that you expect to be treated with. They're not a threat, okay? Leave them alone, and probably you'll find out that they leave you alone, okay? Leave them alone. Let them be free. Let them celebrate their own dinner, celebrating their own freedom in the West Bank. Let them have their own dinner, celebrating their own freedom in Gaza. Let them have their own dinner, celebrating their own dinners in southern Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran. Leave them alone. Celebrate your freedom, and understand you have no right to celebrate your freedom if you don't acknowledge the same equal rights to every other human being on the planet.
Wonderful.
Well,
Yeah, it delivered with the eloquence of the Sermon on the Mount, but I hope it gets followed with greater scrupulousness. All right, I got to go now. Jeffrey, see you next week. Thank you.
I
Bye-bye.